Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope you're all doing well despite the gloomy weather outside. Luckily you don't have to travel or anything like that. You're in a nice, dry, warm environment. My name is Junior. I work in the Education and Youth team at City Hall. Today's webinar is Teaching Primary Science through Maths and English. So we'll be exploring how primary teachers can integrate aspects of the science curriculum into English and Maths to create time to teach all three core subjects. So thank you again for joining us today. Just a few more things from me before I pass you over to Naomi. We will be sending you the slides and any other bits from today's session. This session will be recorded so you can rewatch it, and you can also share it with your colleagues. And please use the Q&A section to make any comments and ask any questions. Naomi will be trying to get to any questions. So Naomi, could you please go to the next slide? So as you can see, for the third year, we are organising the Mayor's London Scientist Teacher Programme. This is the first time that we are inviting primary school teachers to take part. There's a lot of benefits to participating. You can find out more through the link which has been sent in the chat here. And you can find out if your school is eligible to join. At this point, I would also encourage you to sign up to the London Curriculum programme to hear about more webinars, opportunities for you and your pupils. Once registered, you will also have access to all of our free lesson plans. I will also put that link in the chat. So that's the London curriculum there. And then also I will include, the link I just posted in the chat is for the webinars page, but for the London curriculum will be the next one. Will be the next link there. So you can access those, and we have many more webinars that we've done, and you can see all of the recordings and get the slides as well. So enough from me. I'm going to pass it over to Naomi now, who's going to take over for the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, my name's Naomi Hiscock, and this afternoon I'm going to be talking about teaching primary science through maths and English. This was the blurb that you probably have read when you signed up for this webinar. And this is the government's recommendations. It's their statement about what teachers need to be thinking about in this year going forward after the closures from COVID-19. And there is this priority on ensuring that we identify those gaps and get back on track with that good progress with our phonics, reading, writing and maths. And there is a concern, and I am hearing this concern from schools where they're having to focus on their maths and English and feel that there is this potential for science to get squeezed out of the curriculum. But we do also need to bear in mind that the government's guidance does also require the majority of pupils to be taught the full range of subjects, and that does include science. So whilst we all may be feeling the pressure to revert to more maths and English teaching, we do need to try and provide that broad and balanced curriculum. So that's what we're going to be looking at this afternoon. Before we start, I'd like just to do a quick survey. And if you either open another tab on your computer, or if you've got a phone that you can grab, if you go to www.menti.com, as you should see on the screen, and typing the code 3900792 as it states there, and I would like you just to vote for how much time do you think you're going to be able to devote to science in the immediate future. Okay, so it seems like most of you at this point in time do keep posting if you've still got, if you still haven't quite submitted. majority seem to feel that sort of 30 minutes to 60 minutes is where you're likely to be going forward, and some of you are in the 60 to 90, and at the moment we've just got one person who's in that hour and a half to 2 hours. What we would normally be saying under normal circumstances, the Wellcome Trust report recommends that it's 2 hours of science teaching, but actually most schools don't actually meet that anyway. What I'd just like to go on now and ask you to think about is this, sorry, it's now going to change to another set of slides and a different question. Do you think this is going to be less time than you would have taught in the future, or is it the same? So are you going to be giving less time? And I can immediately see people are very quickly going, yes, we think we're going to be devoting less time to science. But it is nice to see that there are schools who are now coming in, is now catching up, who are feeling that actually science time's not going to be hampered. In fact, that's a real positive. I might stop you submitting now when it's, okay, it's swinging the other way again. But what's good is that whichever camp you're in, if you're in the no, you're not devoting less time, that's absolutely excellent, and it shows that science is going to be thriving. And if slightly less science is going to be devoted, that's why you're here today, so we can think about how can we sneak a little bit of extra science in. So thank you very much. I'm going to go back to my presentation, although if you haven't submitted, you will be able to continue to submit for a couple of a little bit longer. Okay, so the aims for this afternoon were these, and again, these were in the preamble for the webinar. So we're going to be thinking about how science can be used as a context for both English and maths. Think about which topics in the science curriculum are particularly suited for this sort of cross-curricular learning, and then think about, I'll just share a few resources that you may already have, or you may have accessed, or you may find useful in the future going forward. So we're going to think about how science fits into the 3 strands of the English curriculum: the speaking and listening, the reading and the writing, and I'm going to take each of those in turn. So with the spoken language in the English curriculum, there are just these sets of statements for years 1 all the way through to year 6. And I'm just going to let you read those ones that I've highlighted in orange first. So I've picked those ones out in particular to start with, because for me, those are the objectives that support the children with developing thinking. And I think science is a really good context for children to develop their thinking. And a resource that you may well be very familiar with is the Explorify, where there are a number of it's free to sign up. Hopefully a lot of you have already signed up and been using these activities, but for each area of the curriculum there are a range of different activities, and you can see them there: odd one out, zoom in, zoom out, what's going on, what if, big questions. And many of those, in fact all those first ones that I've mentioned, are literally just talk activities where the children discuss and share their ideas and question each other and have to justify. So actually it's all those things that were part of the English curriculum as well. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're familiar with Explorify and you found particular activities from there that really support the children with your teaching of those English objectives, maybe just pop some of your favourite ones onto the chat. Or if you've got other science activities that you've done that you really feel help develop children's thinking that could be part of English lessons, pop those on the chat as well. Okay, so the zoom in, zoom out one somebody's posted, and that's really good because nobody can be sure what it is, and it is all about justifying what you think it is and why you think that. So that's a really good one for challenging children to explain their thinking. I'm going to carry on, and when things arrive in the chat I can go back and respond to those later, or we'll also summarise what goes on in the chat so that you can look at it later, and that will be sent out afterwards. So I'm going to carry on now. So we've looked at those ones, and for me those are the ones that develop children's thinking. And then we have these other ones which I've highlighted in purple, and again I'm just going to leave you to read those. So these statements that I've highlighted in purple, for me, they're more like presentation. It's developing the children's presentation, and why shouldn't they be presenting their science learning? Part of being a good scientist is to be able to communicate that learning that you've got, what you've found out. So it's an important part of science, but actually you can see here within the spoken language, there's scope for being able to do that as part of English lessons as well. So what we need to do if we're going to do this is we've got to make sure that we really do teach the key vocabulary and knowledge that the children need before they do their presentations, and that generally will happen during science lessons. But actually what we can be doing during our English time perhaps is giving the children the opportunities to consolidate that science vocabulary and then really to practice explaining those concepts with the correct vocabulary being used really precisely. And that can be done during English time. So we're getting then that double whammy of consolidating the science knowledge and vocabulary whilst also developing their presentation skills, which are needed as part of the English curriculum. So that's a really good way of doing both at once. So I'm just going to share with you just a couple of three examples of how of this way of using that presentation as part of science as part of the English. So this is a play script. It's not a play script, it was actually just scribed by the teacher when the children were doing some role play about selling and buying rocks. So I'll just leave you to read that. Okay, so this was just sort of improvisation where the two children hadn't actually planned anything, but you can see how it shows that they're quite confident with quite a lot of the vocabulary that they've been developing in their science time. So here is a little bit of role play. Again, I'll just leave you to read that. It's also from the Rocks unit in Year 3. Okay, so this child has learnt about a lot of different rocks, and they're pretending to be a pumice stone. And the way that this was set up is that there was little groups of sort of 8 children, and one child at a time went into the centre of the circle and had to role play being a rock, and then the other children had to work out which rock they were. So it's just a really nice way of the children spontaneously talking about different rocks. And here we've got a child in Year 6 explaining how they know that light travels in straight lines. Okay, so obviously this example, you can see the classroom is empty. That was so that the teacher could actually video this for me. But this activity, you could have pairs of children working with another pair of children watching it and perhaps videoing it so that they can go back, comment on each other's, check whether they've used the right vocabulary, watch the videos back and really perfect their presentations. So it wouldn't be that you as a teacher had to watch all those videos. It's actually just part of the process of them developing their explanations. So I think there's some really good opportunities for science contexts to be used within those oral speaking and listening lessons. So I want you just to have a think about also another area is where children are thinking about debate and persuasion. This may lead into some writing, but sometimes you might want to actually set it up as an oral activity where there's either two groups having a debate or one group is trying to persuade the other group. And I'd just like you to think about and post your ideas onto the Q&A of which topics have you taught or are you aware of in the science curriculum that are good opportunities that provide a natural platform for the children to either debate or persuade. Okay, so we've got some comments about evolution and creation, and that's a really nice one to tie in with some RE as well and different people's perspectives. I like the yes, is fast food good for you? Space. And again, those ones like space where our science has changed, our understanding of science has changed over time. So getting the children to pretend that they are from a period a long time ago and they have one set of viewpoints and obviously in a more modern viewpoint and asking them to justify those different viewpoints. Looking after teeth is another one, part of the digestive system. Okay, lovely. Lots and lots of ideas there. Classification, trying to persuade, for instance, where does the duck-billed platypus fit and having to explain and justify that. Do keep typing your ideas. Again, we will save those, but I'm just going to move on now. So we're going to move on and just have a quick look at the reading comprehension aspect of the curriculum. There are other aspects which didn't seem relevant this afternoon, but you can see both in year 1 and year 2, there is a requirement that the children are reading and engaging in non-fiction books, and obviously science is an ideal one for that. And it also talks about them linking their reading with their own experiences or things that they already know. So to me, the perfect opportunity is for the children to experience something in science or learn something new in science and then do some reading afterwards so that actually they can make the links between the two. When we come up into year 3, year 4 and year 5 and year 6, again, we've got the references to them looking and reading non-fiction books, reference books and textbooks that are structured in different ways, using dictionaries to look meanings up and that sort of thing. And then we also get aspects which to me are science research, retrieving and recording information from non-fiction. Appears in all the way through Key Stage 2. And then also that distinguishing between statements of fact and opinion. And again, that ties in with that persuasive or debate that we were talking about just earlier and things where science has changed over time. The difference between science changing over time because we've got more evidence or something like, which would be that sort of space and the world being flat, or opinion like, is fast food bad for you type of thing. So we've got those two different things that we can get the children to think about. So again, what I was just saying earlier is what works really well is to give the children the time to experience that science during the science time and then enrich it with reading during English time. So again, if you can just go to the chat in the Q&A and think about, are there schemes of work in your, are there science books in your reading schemes? If you've got a great reading scheme that has got lots of science books in it, please do share that on the chat because everybody's always asking for schemes with science books in. Are there any particular favourite books that you like to read, non-fiction ones where children can link it to their topics. Then also think about how else do you give children access to science books? Are they home reading books? Can they borrow them from your school library? I know all these things are subject to not being able to do them at the moment, but you may well have ways around it. Or how else do you encourage them to do some science reading? So I'm just going to let you post your ideas on the chat of how you get children reading in science. So we've got something about Mary Anning, borrowing library books from your local library, your teaching library, that include science, women in science. So yeah, another comment about Mary Anning. Yeah, there are a number of magazines. Whiz Bang Pop's just been mentioned, and there are at least 2 others which the names are going to elude me right now. You may also get the newspaper delivered, not the normal newspaper. There's a newspaper that some schools subscribe to, so children's newspaper, and that quite often has science related things in it as well. Okay, lots of lovely ideas coming in there. I'm going to carry on, but please do keep posting, because the more we've got on there, the more I can share with you later. So I'm not going to ask you to post this on the chat. I'm just going to ask you to just think very quickly of all the different types of writing that you use either in your everyday lives or the types of text, the writing that you have to teach. So we've already mentioned persuasion and debate. See how many different types of writing you can count up in the next 10 seconds. And then what I'd like us to have a little think about is which of those might be suitable to use as a way of the children sharing their science writing. So persuasion and debate, and we've got some lovely ideas for that on the chat already. And you may well think of things like a non-chronological report, for instance, if you're doing classification and you want to talk about the different groups of animals, for instance. A chronological report would be good for the digestive system or something like that. So there's some quite obvious ones, but actually there's some other types of writing that sometimes it's quite interesting for the children to use those different types of writing for their science. So I'm just going to show you just a few examples. So here we've got a What Am I poem from Year 1. So you can see from that they've obviously experienced a pumpkin. I'm not sure whether they actually grew their own pumpkins or whether they just brought the pumpkins in, but they've used their descriptive language about it. They know that people grow them. They also know that they're used for Halloween. Here we've got an interesting type of writing, which I would never have thought of doing, which is always lovely to work with teachers who have very creative ideas. So here we've got a job description for the job of a heart. To be able to write something like that, the children do really have to have a really good, secure understanding of the science knowledge. Just going to let you read this little story from Year 4 about the digestive system. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to read that. What I've put here is from the Plan Knowledge Matrix, and I've put the website there just in case you're not familiar with the resource and want to have a little look at it. So in the matrix, you can see there what that key learning is for that part of the digestive for that topic. I'll just let you read, just focus on the key learning in particular. So I've just highlighted that little bit there because parts of that have not been covered in this child's piece of writing. You probably identify that they didn't actually talk about what happened to the nutrients or the water. And in fact, they also didn't talk about the different types of teeth either in their writing. And just to sort of help you understand why that might be, is that the way the teacher set it up was that the children were given a list of vocabulary, and having a list of vocabulary is really important, and that is really supportive for the children. But the way that the teacher had set it up, as you can see here, with those words that children must use, all those words were used and they were used correctly. But then we have these words that should be used or could be used. And actually that gives it the discretion of the child. And you'll notice there that absorb and water and nutrients weren't in the must column, they were in the should or could. And so therefore you can totally understand why the child has chosen not to use them. So the vocabulary is excellent. Just think about how you're presenting it so that you ensure that the children do include the knowledge and vocabulary that you're hoping they're going to include. So what's really important, if we want high quality science writing, the children have to be really secure on those two things. They need to know what the characteristics of the writing are, and they also really need to be secure on the knowledge and the key vocabulary that you're expecting them to include. So it's almost like you've got two sets of success criteria, the ones that will help them achieve the writing and the ones that will help them achieve the science. There's a range of resources as far as linking science with English. So these are just two free resources that are on the internet. You'll have these slides later, so you'll be able to access those links. So there's the STEM Learning website where they've got common books that teachers use at those different phases with lots of activities linked to them. And then on that science lady, Catherine Horan's website, she's got, for each area of the curriculum, she's got a list of possible stories that you might link to particular topics in science. And there's also these other books that you may have lurking in your cupboard somewhere, which might be worth having a dig out if you've got them, or you might want to have a look at them for yourself. So I'll just move on from there. And now we're going to move on to start thinking about maths. If anybody would like to comment any more about English, then please do put that onto the chat, but we're going to move on to maths now. And in particular, we're going to focus on two areas of the maths curriculum, the measures and statistics elements. What I've got here is I've summarised very briefly the maths, some of them, one element of the maths national curriculum, which is from year 1 to year 3. And you can see it's very much about measuring and comparing a range of different types of measurements. And that ties in very closely with the national curriculum objectives for science from years 1, 2 and year 3 and 4, where they're firstly making close observations initially by comparisons, then starting to move on to standard units, and once they get into lower key stage 2, they're expected to be able to use standard units. So what this might look like is that in year 1, here we've got a question. The children are trying to think about whether taller people have bigger feet, and these children have literally just taken themselves and another child, they've compared their heights, and then they've compared the size of their feet. So very much direct comparison of two things. Then when we move into year 2, these children have been exploring materials and their properties, and they were given a range of different fabrics which they then pulled and stretched, and from that they were able to put them in order from most stretchy to least stretchy. So we're comparing more things now. And then when they move into year 3, we've now got here an investigation where they're seeing how close does the magnet need to be to the paperclip to actually make it slide along different surfaces. So it's a nice example where we've got magnets and friction being used in one investigation. And here you can see that they're now actually taking standard measurements so that they can make the comparisons that way. So you can see the progression through there. What I'd like you to do, I've just given an example of lengths and heights. I'd just like you to look at the topics for year 1, year 2 and year 3 and think about what type of activities might the children be involved in measuring and comparing either lengths and heights, but also particularly those other units. Do keep typing, but I am going to move on because there's a number of slides that you can then start to feed your ideas in all at once, perhaps. So moving through to year 4 to year 6, there's a shift in the maths curriculum from measuring and comparing to converting between different units of measurement, using those same types of measurements. And in the year 5 and in the science curriculum, there is still a focus on measuring more accurately, more precisely, and selecting equipment. But again, there is scope for hitting that maths objective during those science lessons. So for instance, I'm just going to give you one example here. So in year 5, where to do with animals including humans, where they're looking at different life cycles, here I've just researched and collated some data about the weight of various animals and their gestation periods. And you can see those numbers that I've put in red, those were ones where I actually had to convert from grams into kilograms. So you can see there I'm already using that math skill in a science context. And then I've now just plotted those results. I just chose to use a spreadsheet. Obviously, if it's a maths lesson, you could be asking the children to plot those points and draw the graph by hand. So you can see that the points there. And I'm sure that you are able to spot a pattern. It's quite obvious there that actually the heavier the adult weight is, the higher the adult weight, the longer the gestation period. But there are 2 animals that don't quite, they don't seem to, they're a little bit of an anomaly. Their particular weights and gestation periods don't seem to fit with the general trend. I just wonder whether you can work out which animals they are. You'll need to look at the points on the graph, on the scatter graph, and then link those back to the table. I hope I've given you enough time for that little challenge. So one of them is the chimpanzee and the other one is the sea lion. So you can see there how we had to convert the data into a different type of measurement. We've plotted it and then we've gone back, looked for a pattern and then identified our anomalies from that. So again, if you have been teaching or you're familiar with year 4, 5 and 6, perhaps just type into the chat any particular science activities or topics that you think or you know that your children have had to be involved in converting units. But I'm going to move on. I was just having a quick look at your comments from the year 1 and year 2 and year 3, so that's perfect. Do the same for year 5 and year 6, 4, 5 and 6. Somebody has already jumped onto my statistics bit actually, but that's absolutely fine. So we've been talking about measurement and now we're just going to look at some of the statistics elements of the maths curriculum. And you can see there, if you look at the year 2, year 1 doesn't have statistics, year 2 in maths and compare it to the science, you can see that actually what's recommended in the plan resources to clarify that statement about gathering and recording data, it ties in totally with the maths curriculum. So they're looking at the same types of graphing. And what this might look like perhaps in year 1 is here the children over a period of time were logging what type of weather they had each day. And then this has just been done as a class where they just put the symbol straight onto a pictogram. Indeed, I think that's the right word, going mad. In year 2, in fact, somebody commented on this in the post, that it could be that they're doing a survey of animals and they're using tally charts to record what they find in different areas. This could also be presented as a pictogram, or in fact could be then presented as a bar chart, depending on the needs of your children. When we get up into year 3 and year 4 in maths, basically it's just an extension of the types of presentation they're using. So we've now moved into bar charts using some discrete and continuous data, and it also talks about solving problems. And again, the same types of presentation are used in science, although we do have the addition of Venn diagrams and Carroll diagrams in science as well. So for instance, if we take a science context, we might have gathered a lot of data about how a car travels on different surfaces. And I might then ask the children either to answer questions or in fact actually come up with their own questions for other children to answer, such as how much further does the car move on the doormat than the rug? What's the difference between the distance travelled on the wooden floor and the kitchen tiles? And then I might ask them to make a prediction. So this is then using their science, this is the science part, making their prediction about how far they think it will go on a marble floor. So they'd need to think about the surfaces and how would the marble floor compare to those other ones. So it's almost like thinking, are we doing science or are we doing maths at this point? And again, in year 5 and year 6, it's very much the same, a broader range of types of presentation being used, the science tying in with the maths. And so, for instance, it may be that the children have carried out a comparative test where they're measuring things over time. And you can see here that they've gathered the data in the table. They could then draw the line graph, or I've just chosen to put it into a spreadsheet again, so it does it like that. And then you could be asking questions. What's the drop in temperature of the water in the plastic cup? Which is the best insulator? So I would say that first question is using the science context as a maths question, whereas the second question is more using the maths presentation as a science question. And here we've got another part of the maths curriculum was about taking averages, and obviously that's part of the science curriculum where they're doing repeat readings and taking averages as well. Just checking the time. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you just a couple of minutes. We've already had some posts around different types of presentation that used for different topics, but again, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to post your ideas about the different types of presentation that you've used in different science topics, but perhaps we could be using in our maths time. Okay, so I think hopefully you can see that there are lots of scopes. There's so many opportunities for science and maths to be incorporated, and it's almost like sometimes you're not sure really whether you're doing maths or you're doing science, or actually are they the same thing. And I think it's really good for the children to realise how maths skills are used in science and science skills can be used in maths as well, and that they actually use them to the best of their ability, and they don't think they can do things in a more sloppy way because they're in a science lesson. If they can measure to the nearest millimetre, they should be measuring to the nearest millimetre. So again, using science time to actually gather the data perhaps, and then spending maths time interpreting and presenting it. Or, heaven forbid, could we actually do the science inquiry in some maths time? I'll leave that one with you. Maybe if people have done that, do please comment on the chat. So there is a book around linking science with maths, which you may have and want to pull out again, or you may want to have a little look at. I didn't, although this session was really about maths and English, I thought I would just throw in some other links to other subjects, because the more we can make links with other subjects, the more time we've got for science. So actually close observation can also be art, so do think about that. In geography, they have to do a lot of map making and that sort of thing. So actually, if you're taking the children out, why not use it as an opportunity to make maps of where different plants are in the area or where they find particular animals? If you're doing DT, lends itself nicely. There's units that the children would need to be doing using electricity, so obviously tying that in with when you're doing electricity in science. When they're choosing resources, they should be thinking about the materials and their properties. And there's also an element of cooking in the DT, which obviously ties into food, healthy eating, where plants come from. So there's a lot of crossover links there. Don't forget also PE, they can be exploring their bodies during PE lessons, thinking about the importance of exercise and the impact on their bodies and the pulse rates. And then with the new guidance for SRE or RSE, there are a lot of links, as you can see there, between that curriculum and what is in the science curriculum. So there's no need to be teaching things twice, you just need to make sure that you're covering both of them in the appropriate way. So just to finish with, I'm just going to leave the chat open. We'll just have a minute or so for you to pause and think about, are there any other sneaky ways that you could squeeze more science into your week? So we've talked a lot about squeezing or adding it to science, adding it to maths and English lessons, or possibly making links with other topics, other curriculum areas. But are there any other ways that you have just got a little bit of extra science in to your week? So we'll leave the chat open so that you continue to type any extra sneaky ways you can think of to get more science into the curriculum. But I'm going to finish now. So thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I hope that's given you some ideas of how you can incorporate science into your maths and English lessons. And I will just hand back over to Junior. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Naomi. I think we can all agree that there were some really great ideas shared, and I hope that you've managed to take a lot from today's session. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in and participated in the chat. We will be collating the chat together, so we will include it in the slide pack that you'll receive. We would really appreciate it if you could fill out the feedback form, which I will post now in the chat as well. And let me just post that now. Here is the feedback form. So if you could please fill that out, that would be really useful. And I hope you have a great evening. And once again, thank you so much for joining.